Hey, let's talk about some introductions. That's where you set up the exigence, in other words, where you make it important that someone read your paper. It is where you set up the value systems. What is it that you're trying to get the reader to value? How are you appealing to the reader's values? But it's also where you start writing with style. So I have here 3 different introductions, and let's take a look at them. So the first one, oh gosh, I can't say this name, but this person's name, a Nigerian author, explains the idea of something overrated, this being stereotypes. This single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. In the modern world, people tend to create specific stereotypes by taking situations out of context and making them overrated. All of that is your hook. To be clear, a stereotype is an oversimplified image about a person or thing. Not exactly sure what that is. There are millions of stereotypes for all kinds of circumstances, and these can affect the way that people view them without knowing the backstory or the reality of those people's situations. That's your bridge. This creates absurd ideas, all because of false assumptions. That, I am assuming, is a thesis. The problem is it seems to be a general thesis. And what I mean by that is it's not telling me what the stems are, what the body paragraphs are going to be. And so it leaves me feeling a little bit in the dark. But if the body paragraphs are strong, that's acceptable. So, next one. Imagine associating a person with being dumb because of the generation they were born into. Well, recently, people under 30 are under fire, being called the dumbest generation. The shots being taken are unfair, as times are different than those prior because of the internet. And this generation maintains previous standards. People under 30 simply cannot be considered the dumbest generation because of statistical evidence and their accessibility to endless information that has never before been readily available. Last sentence is thesis. This time it is a stemmed thesis. I've got very clear statistical evidence and accessibility to endless information. So, third one. Plato's allegory of the cave describes the understanding of reality determined by one's surroundings. The setting is a cave, and reality is understood by the people within as shadows because this is all they are exposed to. Only when freed from the cave and exposed daylight does anyone see true reality. However, those who have not left the cave view those who have with fear and cannot understand them. For the reader, it is clear who is ignorant, but within the allegory, it shows that people cannot see others' perspectives and objectively determine intelligence. The subjective and fluid nature of intelligence from one group to the next disallows anyone from saying one generation is more ignorant than another. People under 30 can be seen as dumb when taking into account changes from technology, but there is no definitive way to measure overall intelligence. Therefore, the youngest generation cannot be called the dumbest. That is a very strong argument thesis. So you've got the, hey, this is my position. The youngest generation cannot be called the dumbest. No, they are not dumb. So that takes a very clear position, which means somewhere in the paper, I am going to assume there will be a rebuttal. However, here are your 3 different intros. And here is the question I have to ask you. Which of these 3 intros is high, which is medium, and which is low? So, let's start with which 2 have strong thesis. Okay, hopefully you really identified that you have a very strong thesis here. And that's because I know immediately the statistical evidence and the accessibility to endless information. I know what my 2 body paragraphs are going to be. I also hope you recognize this is very strong because I have a very strong position where I'm like, no, they not be dumb. The problem up here is not necessarily the thesis itself. The thesis is okay. The problem is you are sending me into the paper not really knowing what it is that I'm going to find in the paper. So I'm walking into it a little bit blind. That's a little bit uncomfortable. So this first thesis is not as strong as, so this one, it's okay, but not great, versus these two, which are very, very strong. Now, next question. Where is the strongest hook? Okay, hopefully you told me that the strongest hook really was here. Now, could this be phrased clearer? Yes, there is some unclearness here. So clarity is an issue. So you have to make sure that you're being very, very clear. However, this has great exigence. With Plato being one of the great thinkers of the day, of any day, bringing in Plato really makes this paper feel important. So I get great importance off of going with Plato. I also get this great sense of context. This idea that, dude, this topic is the youngest generation stupid. Well, that does not feel like a very academic topic to write about. In fact, it kind of sounds like old people whining. So the very fact that you take what sounds like a rather whiny topic and put it within the context of a great thinker, that feels very, very important. It feels like great context. It's why I keep pushing you to use your philosophers. So this is really the best hook. So which is the okay hook? Hopefully you came up with the okay hook is going to be this one up here. So what is okay about it? We do have a Nigerian author. Oops, sorry. I grabbed the wrong pen, so I crossed it out instead of highlighting. It wasn't what I tried to do. You do have a Nigerian author, and you also have, so I know that this is someone who, is significant. They are an author, and the quote really does feel like, okay, that's an interesting idea. The single story creates stereotypes. The stereotype comes from having a single story, and the problem is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. They make one story the only story. That really is, it's a great quote for making me stop and go, whoa, that's kind of, yeah, I can see that. If you're going to stereotype white people as, they're Karens who go to Starbucks, that's not untrue. There are white people who are Karens who love Starbucks, but it's not the only thing that's true. So that is it's a great quote. So it's thought-provoking. But does that take the idea of stereotyping and does it create great exigence where it's like, this is important? Well, that's such a great quote. I would say this quote does have exigence. Does it have context? Does this quote put the idea of stereotyping into a larger historical or philosophical context? Yeah, kind of not as great. So that's why this is an okay intro. It works. It certainly does work. I'm not unhappy with it. If you were to have the quote and then give some historical context, that might be able to overcome the fact that the quote by itself doesn't give context. If you were able to give me more information about the author so that I felt like I understood how this author related to the topic of discrimination in modern American workplace, then with a little bit more information about the author, then I might be able to see some context. So I would say this is almost there. I would say it's not quite there yet. So that leaves us with the low hook. And that is right here. Imagine associating a person with dumb because of the generation. I hate imagine intros, and here's why. You're not doing any of the work yourself. You are trying to bootstrap onto my imagination by forcing me to do the work for you. I don't want to do the work. I know what my imagination can create. I want you to share your thoughts, and you're not sharing your thoughts here. Now, in terms of exigence and context, does this have exigence? Do you read this and go, oh my God, yes, that's an important topic to read about? Probably not. Does it give context? Do I have a historical or philosophical context? Definitely not. So this is really a very weak introduction. So in terms of your thesis, these are the two strongest. In terms of the hook, this is your strongest, with this being, okay, maybe not a close second, but it's certainly a second place, which is far ahead of this hook. So now let's talk about the language. First things first, what are you seeing in terms of linking verbs? Did you catch all those linking verbs? Now, when I am looking at these linking verbs, a couple of things. First of all, you can see this one and this one are actually inside the quotation, so I can't very well criticize somebody else's quote. But so this first one is probably the best of them. However, when you look at the second and third, not only do you have linking verbs, but you have linking verbs that really interfere with the meaning. Take a look at, well, let's start here with this third one. When I read it out loud, I'm assuming that you discovered that it's this opening part that really, when I read it out loud, you're like, what? And a lot of that is because you have too many linking verbs, and the linking verbs commit kind of the cardinal sin. Reality is understood by the people. Let's talk about that. What's the verb? I really hope you said understood. Who is doing the understanding? That would be the people, which means the people should be the subject that goes with this verb, but it isn't. So, how do I get people up front to be a verb? Well, very simple. Instead of writing reality is understood by the people, what is the subject? The people. Then put it in the subject spot. People understand reality. Not only would that get rid of a linking verb, but it would be clearer and easier to understand. These linking verbs, because they have become what's called passive voice, and passive voice is where the whole sentence is backwards, it has become confusing. So it should not be reality is understood by the people within as shadows. It should be people inside understand reality as shadows. Now it's clearer. So the linking verbs are interfering with the message. So let's take a look at another one. Because this is all they are exposed to. What is the verb? Exposed. Who is doing the exposing? We don't know. This is a particularly heinous form of passive voice where the person who's doing the action, the exposing, has been left out of the sentence altogether. So, people within Understand reality as shadows, because you have to decide what is actually doing the exposing. Because living in ignorance has exposed people to only shadows and falsities. Now you're telling me what's actually doing the exposing. The fact that this uses passive voice and that it has too many linking verbs is what makes this unclear. Remember where I said, look, you have to be careful with clarity? And when I read it out loud, it sounded weird. The linking verbs are what's actually creating that. And not just the linking verbs, but the fact that those linking verbs are passive voice. You've got to get rid of passive voice. So let's take a look at this one in the middle. So we have being called the dumbest generation. What's the verb? Called. Who is doing the calling? Yeah, you don't tell me, do you? I'm assuming we're talking about older people here. However, you haven't told me that's who the subject is. And so that's why this is passive voice, and it's really unclear. So you do have some passive voice here. But more than that, oh, here's another piece of passive voice. Be considered. Who's doing the considering? Who's the subject here? You don't tell me. But more than that, you have so many linking verbs that you don't have enough action going on. So you don't actually have the verbs that drive things forward, where it's like, that's interesting. Versus, take a look here. Okay, in the first and third, I have circled in blue any of the active verbs. Active verbs really make writing interesting. Now, up top, you can see that you do have a lot of these active verbs, and so that's why this does come across as stronger. However, if you look, explains, creates, create, make, take, make, affect, create. Do y'all see how little bit repetitive the verbs are? Versus down at the bottom, freed, exposed, see, view, understand, show, see, determine, disallow, taking, measure. So this has a lot more power because you have stronger verbs, and most of the power in writing does in fact come through verbs. So sometimes students don't understand why one paper is better than another. Well, hopefully after looking at this, you can see this would be probably an A minus, like seriously, maybe a B plus, because dude, do make sure that you don't have that passive voice that makes it a little unclear in the beginning. But the back half of this is really, really, really well done. This intro would probably be a B. You have exigence. With a little bit of work, you could give me enough context to understand how this author connects to your topic, which is discrimination in a modern American workplace. But that context is a little bit missing. And you are not over-relying on linking verbs. However, the active verbs that you do have are a little bit repetitive. This needs to be reworked. Okay, so that was a lot of information. Let's see how you evaluated intro on your own. First question, well, first of all, read it. Read the whole thing together. Now that you've done that, first question, what do you think of the thesis? Yep, you've got motivation. Technological advances play two major key roles in determining the present and future knowledge of younger generations. Now, I will say that I think this person is saying that I think they're saying that they don't think that the youngest generation is dumb. It's a little tiny bit unclear, but I do know what my two body paragraphs are. So I would say that's a solid intro, and hopefully as I start reading body paragraphs, it becomes really, really clear. Next question. What do you think of the hook? Remember, you're looking at exigence, you're looking at context. What do you think? Yeah, this is a little bit of a problem. I have a tiny bit of context here because it's actually putting it in the context of a person's life. Hey, in your life. The problem is if that person has not had that phrase used on them, then the reader's really not going to connect with that context. The context is not very universal. So you're really hoping that the reader's going to go, yeah, that did happen to me. And if it didn't happen to your reader, it's a little bit of a problem. How about exigence? Yeah, this is not feeling like, yes, this is an important topic to talk about. So it misses exigence. How often do I have to beg you to use philosophers for you to connect with that? Because I'm really hoping you're going to start connecting with that. Okay, so next up, what do you think of the linking verbs? Okay, it doesn't look terribly bad until we look at a couple of things. First of all, what is the purpose of a subject? Yeah, tells you what the sentence is going to be about. What is the purpose of a verb? Yep, to give action. So it is a subject which doesn't actually tell me what the subject is, and a verb that has no action. There are certain openings. It is, there are, there were. All of these are complete and utter failures because you have a subject that's not doing its job plus a verb that's not doing its job, which means you have a lot of laziness going. So that is not a great way to open. And you then have is looked at, who's doing the looking, is seen, who saw it. In other words, what would we call these? Yeah, these are passive voice. Because you are not telling me who's doing the action. And so it's really awkward. So in terms of the number of linking verbs, it's not too bad. In terms of what you actually have there, you have a really weak opening plus two pieces of passive voice. Not great. Now, what do you think of the diction? The actual word use and how well it communicates a tone. Okay, here's what I'm seeing in terms of the word use. I see some really strong word use. It's evident, it's conditional. These are strong words, but then I have them in with right or wrong, bigger picture, which are almost slang type words. Dumber and Dumber. That feels very casual. And so I've got a weird mixture here on tone where I've gotten a couple of words that are academic on one side, and then I've got other words that are very informal on the other, and I'm not sure which tone the person is really going for. And then, okay, maybe this person is really going for frustration. Maybe they want to point out, hey, older people always do this. What the crap is wrong with older people? Frustration would be a very valid tone for that. But when I look at things like talking, teach, those don't seem to be communicating any tone. So if I were to say the phrase, when I was your age, is often, well, and by the way, that's also passive voice, is used by adults. Adults use the phrase, when I was your age, when talking to kids. Well, what could we choose? When lecturing to kids. That would get frustration apart. When informing kids, that would give it more distant, make it a little bit more maybe academic. When advocating to kids, well, that advocating would make the older person feel more like they are trying to protect the younger person. But I guess my problem is talking has no tone to it at all. So the tone here needs to be really kind of cleaned up. So I would say here, this is probably an intro that's on the lower side. So now we've moved into a body paragraph. This one focuses on pain. So let's take a look. In order to promote his message of passive patriots needing to fight against Britain, should they want to secure future prosperity for themselves and their children, Paine references common values that most of his colonial audience would likely understand or even abide by themselves. So, when I look at that, first of all, I am seeing that that is a very significant and long sentence. Why is that nice? In order to tells me that I've got cause and effect. Promote his message of passive patriots needing to fight against Britain should they want to secure future prosperity for themselves and their children, comma, tells me that's my split between cause and effect. Paine references common values that most of his colonial audience would even understand. Option 1, or option 2, abide by themselves. So I know I've got cause, effect, two different choices, and even within this opening phrase, to promote the message of passive patriots needing to fight against Britain, I have this. There's only one reason why they need to fight against Britain. Should they want to secure future prosperity for themselves and their children. Those are the ones that Paine is appealing to. And so what I have here is a very complex sentence that I have a subordinate phrase in order to promote his message of passive patriots needing to fight against Britain. I then qualify that subordinate phrase. Look, they only have to fight if they want to secure future prosperity. Independent phrase. Paine references common values that most of his colonial audience would likely, and then we're going to have two options, they would likely understand or even abide by themselves. So, why is that long sentence so good? Because it's telling me relationships. I have a very clear sense of what the relationships are, and I will tell you, the AP board loves this DCIC structure because what it means is I've got a less important idea and I've got a more important idea. They like that because by having an independent clause, a more important idea, it tells me this is the main idea. And guess what? That is the main idea. The fact that Paine is appealing to values, that's what this whole paragraph is going to be about. So the main idea is put into this independent clause, and the subordinate idea is the supporting detail. So the structure works. It communicates the importance of the idea as well. That's just a really, really nice opening. What else do I like about this opening? Well, I want you to take a look at something. We've seen other people struggle a little bit with verbs, and verbs are where you carry most of the power in your writing. Look at the verbs: promote, fight, want, secure, references, understand, abide. So what I'm seeing there is I'm seeing some really powerful and some very varied verbs. And so I don't see the linking verb problems. I'm not seeing the repetition problems. So these verbs have a lot of power. What else has power? I see higher level word choice, but I also see a lot of word choice here to secure, to promote, to fight. I'm seeing a lot of word choice here that is about conflict, which leads me to believe that the tone is probably going to have something to do with being very confrontational, with being very aggressive, and that's a strong tone to take. But I like the fact that one sentence in, I'm already seeing a lot of control over the details. So let's take a look at the next section. To further his agenda, for example, he recalls an anecdote about a tavern keeper who laments a lack of peace in his day while carrying his young child, which Paine chides as an unfatherly expression, instead believing that he should let the trouble be in his day so that his child may have peace. By citing this story, he directly plays on the familial values of love and parental affection likely to be held by most colonists, rendering the fight for independence a deeply personal matter by effectively claiming that anyone who refuses the call is an ineffectual caretaker who is allowing his or her children to live idly in a world that they are bound to suffer, naturally inspiring a measure of guilt. Okay, can we talk about the fact that content is awesome? Because it is. I love the fact that you're talking about the reader's value system. If you can identify what someone values and appeal to what someone values, you are always going to be able to move them and to inspire them. So the fact that during a rhetorical analysis that the student is like, look, what's really important is that Paine uses that value system. Well, they've clearly identified one of the most important things in Paine's writing. So that's really nice. But let's start. First of all, linking verbs. What are you seeing in terms of linking verbs? Okay, it's not too bad. This one is inside a quote, so we're going to have to get rid of that one. So just ignore it because we don't change inside quotes. Not unless we do something with the square brackets there, because clearly we don't want to say my day. We want to say his day. So that's nice. Now, question. Do I have too many linking verbs clumped up here? Well, my first question is, do I have any passive voice? Anyone who refuses the call is an ineffectual caretaker. Do I have a verb following the is? No. Okay. Then that's not passive voice. Who is allowing his or her children to live? Okay. Allowing is a verb. So here's the question. Who's doing the allowing? The caretaker. The caretaker who's doing it. So we do have the subject up front followed by the verb, so that's not passive voice. His or her children to live idly in a world in which they are bound to suffer. They are bound to suffer. Who is bound to suffer? The children. Again, we have the subject in front of the verb, so we have no backward sentences, no passive voice. Given that there's no passive voice, is this too much linking verb? No, especially not. Now, if I had this all over the place, like if I had 3 up here and then 3 in the middle and then 3 in the end, then I would be like, yes, now we're out of control. But overall, given that there's no passive voice and that you just have the one section with linking verbs, I would tend to say that that is okay. Now, what do you think about the active verbs that they've chosen? Oh, look what I discovered as I was marking my verbs. Likely to be held by most colonists. Okay, the familial values of love and affection likely to be held. Held is my verb. It has a linking verb in front of it, be. So I always have to ask, okay, who's doing the holding? The colonists, which means the subject comes after the verb. That is passive voice. So that passive voice would need to get fixed. So that should be actually, he directly plays on the colonists' familial values of love and parental affection. So we just need to get, if the colonists is the subject, we got to get it up front. But let's take a look overall at the active verbs. Recalls, laments, carrying, believes, plays, renders, refuses, allows, inspiring, bound, claim, held, citing. Is there variety? Obviously. Is there a strong tone here? I would say yes, because I want you to look at these. When you render something, that means you apply pressure, you apply heat to try and make the essence come out. But it certainly is you are applying something that's negative. Chide is to scold. Lament is to mourn something, to call out that something is wrong or that you're sad. If you are bound, you are trapped. Is this positive or negative connotation? Yet clearly this is negative connotation. What tone do we have going here? Yeah, I would definitely say that this is a tone of certainly condemnation. I am going to condemn you. I am going to call you wrong. I'm going to chide you. I'm going to render things. I'm going to say that you are bound. I'm going to lament. So this is a very critical tone here. The very fact that that tone comes through so clearly is really a very beautiful thing here. So let's take a look at some of the sentence structure, because clearly, can we agree the vocab is good? Yes. So let's go look at sentence structure. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I start with a DC. In order to promote his message, where's my independent clause? Payne references common values that most colonial audience would likely understand or even abide by themselves. I agree, that's a main idea. We then have another independent clause. Now, to further the agenda, that's a transitional phrase. That's kind of a nice transitional phrase. And then, for example, another transitional phrase. And then we go into another independent clause. He recalls an anecdote about a tavern keeper who laments the lack of peace in his day while carrying his young child. We then have another subordinating conjunction, which takes us into another detail, which Payne chides as an unfatherly expression. So what's the main idea? The fact that all these people who are passive patriots, that what they want is peace in their own day. That's the independent. The dependent is Payne chides this as unfatherly. I'm not sure I agree that that should be a dependent, but I can get that. What they're really doing here is they're emphasizing that these passive patriots want peace. And so even if I disagree with their use of dependent clause, I'll support their use of dependent clause there. Okay, by citing this story, we have another transitional phrase. And so you've got some nice transitional phrases in your sentence beginnings. And what's my next independent clause? He directly plays on the familial values of love and parental affection likely to be held by most colonists. Yes, that's definitely an independent clause. Now, you then have these ing phrases. This is a special type of detail. It's called a participial phrase. Do you care? Not really. But these ing phrases, they do make ideas dangle. They make details dangle off the bottom of an independent clause. So we've got an independent clause up here. Look, he's playing on the familial values. And then you have these details that are following up. That renders the fight for independence a deeply personal matter. It elicits it inspires a measure of guilt. So those become the details. So what I'm really seeing here is I have three main ideas. And again, I grabbed the pen instead of the highlighter. So let me grab the highlighter. We have three of these independent clauses, and then each one has details attached to it. Two of them through dependent clauses. And then this independent clause has two participial phrases or ing phrases. So what I'm seeing there is a nice variety of sentence structures. How about sentence beginnings? In order to, Payne references to further this by citing. So a little heavy reference on that opening introductory phrase. But for the most part, I'm seeing really nice variety here. So overall, what are we thinking of the sentence structure? Yeah, I would say it kind of kicks butt. So this is sentence structure here is really, really good. So what am I seeing? The linking verbs are strong with that one place where you should need to fix the passive voice, but overall, very strong. Tone, I love that I can tell this critical, challenging tone. Active verbs, very, very strong, bring a lot of passion to the writing. Sentence structure, well controlled. So overall, this paper is really, really doing what it needs to do. Now, let's see if you can analyze the next bit. Okay, let's focus just on the section in green. Elicitations of guilt like these are what make Payne's argument so structurally sound, playing upon his audience's natural inclination to love and defend their next of kin. Payne recognizes that these impassioned pleas to affection may not be universally impactful, however. Seeking to reach a wider subset of the American populace, he also cites provocative historical examples directly aimed at the societal positions of the colonists, calling to mind the defeat of the British Army at the hands of the few broken forces led by Joan of Arc, a woman, a loss whose implications he pushes further by suggesting that some Jersey maid would rise up to protect her fellow, presumably male, citizens. This is especially blasphemous. So let's start. What do you guys think of the linking verbs? Okay, overall, linking verbs are pretty good. Now, right here, when you have an interrogative word in the middle, especially when it's next to a linking verb, you can almost always drop it. Playing upon his audience's guilt makes Payne's argument so structurally sound. So it's very easy. When you have an interrogative word, what, how, why, typically you use those up front to create a question. If you have one in the middle, that's generally a signal that you can clean up your structure a little bit. But overall, I'm actually pretty happy with the linking verbs here. What do you think of the active verbs? Not as strong as the first section, not quite as powerful, but I still have nice variety here. And I have, it's certainly driving the point forward. What do you think of the tone? I am a huge fan of the tone. In the previous section, the tone was very critical and challenging. Weirdly here, you've kept that critical, challenging, blasphemous, broken, loss, defend. But you've also picked up this provocative, impassioned, rise up. So now we're starting to pull in this idea that there's another choice. But there's a very, very strong control over word choice here. What do you think about sentence structure? Okay, I have an independent clause that then has an attached participial phrase. I then have a semicolon. Now this semicolon to me feels a little bit weird. Semicolons are generally used to join two short sentences that are very closely related. This feels a little bit odd here because semicolon means the sentence before and the sentence after are essentially saying the same thing. And these two aren't. So that's a slightly odd place to put a semicolon. However, you then have another independent clause. You have one of those participial phrases, the ing phrases, with another independent clause and a participial phrase in between or afterwards. So you've got an independent clause between two participial phrases. So I am seeing that you don't have everything in independent clauses. There is a variety of less important, more important. So I do like that. And you then have the power sentence. This is especially blasphemous. Now, couple of things. ly words, they take away power. So don't tell me it's especially. You are better off to say, this is blasphemous. Or you could even get rid of this is and just blasphemy. Yes, you can have a sentence fragment, like a one-word sentence fragment, if you were doing it intentionally because you're trying to really create that power moment. And here, I think that the one word sentence fragment would work well for a couple of reasons. First of all, the humor really comes out in there. You have both the sarcastic tone of, whoo, really? You need a woman to defend you? While still hanging on to that very negative tone, that's critical tone that's been created in the rest of the piece. But I also think this would be a good place for a one-word sentence fragment as a power sentence, because look at the rest of your sentence. You have especially an ly adverb. Those take away power, they don't add to it, so get rid of it. You have a subject which does not give a clear subject that the sentence is going to be about. You have a verb which has no action. That's one of those sentence beginnings that is kind of a throwaway. So if I just get rid of it and write blasphemy, that's going to really carry a lot more power. And if you listen to it, you can hear it. A loss whose implications he pushes further by suggesting that some Jersey maid rise up to protect her fellow, presumably male, citizens. This is especially blasphemous. Okay, let's try it the new way. A loss whose implications he pushes further by suggesting that some Jersey maid rise up to protect her fellow, presumably male, citizens. Blasphemy. So you get that much stronger pop by doing the shorter sentence. Even if you're not comfortable doing a sentence fragment, because I know that you guys have been kind of nagged on about using correct grammar as opposed to being powerful. So if you're not comfortable doing a sentence fragment and you want to keep the this is, I am okay with that, but you got to get rid of the especially. You're just draining the power out of your own writing. Okay, so hopefully this is helping you see what kinds of issues you need to focus on when you are writing. At least I hope that's what just happened.